This is the Debunking Economics podcast with Steve Keen and Phil Dobbie.
The archives.
Episode 278. Accumulating someone else's wealth.
So if capitalism is driving everyone to make a profit, and we all save a bit of that profit and therefore accumulate more wealth, does that mean everyone can be better off if we all run profitable businesses? So does that mean Boris Johnson's idea of levelling up is a good one? Or is there a limit to how much wealth there is? Today we look at the difference between profit and accumulation, and what exactly are the limits, where are they, and why? That's today on the Debunking Economics podcast with Steve Keen. I'm Phil Dobbie. Thanks for joining us. So when you think about it, if there's a limited supply of money or a set amount of money and somebody is accumulating large parts of it, then doesn't that mean less for everyone else? And yet capitalism is based on being incentivized to make a profit. And so does that mean that you are making that profit and then saving it? Last time we talked about whether in Boris Johnson's world of levelling up, you'll remember we talked about whether someone can actually make gains without impacting others. And a couple of listeners have asked about this idea. How can net profits occur in a fixed supply world, but not net accumulation unless you're acquiring other people's wealth? So everyone can't save, in other words. So, Steve, explain a bit about this.
Yeah, that's what I call an open invitation.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? There we are. And I'll see you at the end. I'll be back in half an hour to wrap up.
Get a cup of coffee. You can send me the cup of coffee you don't drink. You can send it to me electronically. Yeah, I mean it's one of these things which happens so frequently. Actually, I'll start off with a line about you know that I got hammered by a guy called Rory Robinson back in Australia for a bet over house prices, don't you? Okay. Well,
of course.
Yeah. Okay. Now, in the middle, this is. I think it was before the financial crisis. Might have been after. But I ended up on a panel with Guy Debelle, who was one of the deputy governors of the Bank of the Reserve Bank of Australia, and just missed out on getting the top job later. And we had a bit of a chat, and he's a personable bloke. He's the sort of bloke you wouldn't mind inviting over for a game of backyard cricket, that sort of person. But anyway, he said, I don't know why you go on about the debt to GDP ratio, meaning private debt, of course, in my case, because you're comparing a stock to a flow. Now, I didn't feel like saying, well, that's brain dead stupid. You want me to explain why you're wrong? I just basically nodded. And then the next day in the Financial Review, I think it was, there's Rory saying Keane is making a schoolboy error of comparing a stock to a flow. And I went, I just had enough of this. So I wrote a little article called Rory Robinson Designs a Car. And this is back in the days when EVs weren't even on the horizon. You still had hybrids. And so I had him inventing the world's fastest hybrid car by taking his knowledge from economics that you shouldn't make stock flow comparisons, and telling the engineers building the car that they should make no stock flow comparisons when they designed the car. So the chief engineer of the company, whose name was Dr. Strangelove, managed to design the world's fastest hybrid vehicle. And the reason it was so fast was the petrol tank held 1 litre of petrol, which meant you had to go to the petrol station every 30 kilometres to refuel. But that's fine because you weren't making a stock flow comparison, and the stock is you weren't comparing the stock of petrol you had to the flow of petrol needed by this hybrid vehicle. Now that's a long-winded way to say that stock flow comparisons matter, but economists stuff them up all the time. They don't understand it at all. And
it's intrinsic to money supply is the speed of the circulation of money, and that's what.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah. And so this is the point. When people think about profit, they think, even like this happens all the time, and particularly people think they're radical critics of the banking sector, make this mistake all the time. They say that when you borrow $100 from the bank, and the bank charges you 5% interest, then they're giving you 100 and they want 105 back. So therefore you've got to borrow more money the next time round and more money, and this is a fundamental flaw that's going to cause the banking system to collapse. Well, it's just as wrong as Rory Robinson's stuff about stock flow comparisons, because, and this is the point I try to make in a new cartoon, which actually starts being published, I think, in the next week or two, called Funny Money. But the point is that profit is a flow, it is not a stock. So if you borrow, and this is the way that I explain it very, very briefly to people, when I've got two paragraphs to get the point through. If you borrow $100 from a bank, and they charge you 5% interest. That means you have to pay them $5 per year on that outstanding $100. Now, if you borrowed $100 and you hire some people and you manage to turn over, have a business that turns over $200 per year, and you've got to pay your workers $160 per year of that, and you pay the bank $5 per year on the interest of the borrowing of 100, you've got 35 spare, which is your profit per year. So profit is a flow, and it's quite feasible to have positive profits indefinitely from a fixed amount of money turning over indefinitely, just as it's quite possible to pay debt on outstanding loans indefinitely if the money turns over fast enough. I mean, after you've paid so that's the basic point.
So the fact you've borrowed that money, which is new money, of course. If you've borrowed it from the bank, that's new money that's been created, and then you are putting it to good use by circulating it quickly because you're employing people, and then they're spending their money and so forth.
Yeah.
So your profit comes out of that, but you still have money left to pay the interest back to the bank at the end of the day.
That's right, and that's why most business loans they're not ones you've got to pay back at some point in the future. They're rollover loans. And so again, this is one of the reasons people get confused, I think, because when you take out a mortgage as an individual buying a house, then you agree to pay both the interest and the principal back, and people then cloud the two in their minds. But when you take out a business loan, you might borrow, let's say you borrow, I don't know, say $330,000 from a bank to build a set of storage sheds. Then you would quite sensibly hang on to that debt of $330,000. If you earn, say, $65,000 a year from the sheds, then your interest of, say 10%, or even if it was 10%, which would be actually high for a small business loan these days, that'd be $33,000. So half the money you'd make on the sheds would be paying your interest on your bank loan, but none of it paying off the principal. And you could easily sell that business sometime in the future and sell the debt with it, because it's still making that net $33,000 profit above the interest payments you have to make.
Right. And that's how people accumulate wealth, isn't it? By and large, that they build up these businesses. The businesses are worth something. So, like when we look at the richest man in Britain now is Sir Leonard Blavatnik, who, you probably never even heard of, but he's worth...
You're dead right. Can you pronounce that last name very carefully?
Blavatnik. He's worth £23 billion. He's made his money out of the music industry, and he streams boxing events and all that sort of stuff. But...
okay.
That's his net worth, of course. But he spends that money as well. He's got a very nice boat, so people are being employed making his boat, for example. I've seen a photograph of him in a nice suit, so keeping the clothing industry going as well. So so his money isn't sitting idly by. I mean, he's investing it. He's buying stuff with it. So there's a difference, though, isn't there? So there's the money he's invested in stocks and shares. So his accumulated wealth is sitting there in stocks and shares, and then there's money he's spending, which is not accumulating, which is helping the economy go down. That old trickle-down thing, Steve, that is so popular. So what about this accumulation of wealth, though? When you've got someone like that who's made the profit, and through the process that you've described, and he's carried on doing that. And he's got these businesses which he can sell, which is all still good news. But what about the stuff that is just sitting in stocks and shares? That's not so good. That is damaging. That is not leveling up.
This is actually an area that I'm still working on building in the capacity to model in my Minsky software, because the way I've designed Minsky, which is the way that I model financial dynamics, is that everything is either your claim on somebody else or somebody else's claim on you. So if your asset, for example, if you're a bank, then one of your assets is the mortgage that you've taken out to buy your home. So it's a liability for you as a home buyer, but an asset for the bank. And you add up all the assets and liabilities, because they're adding up claims on other people and other people's claims on other people. The sum is zero. So that's what we call financial assets. But what we're looking at as well as non-financial assets, and this is this is where things get curly, because think about the house. If you buy a house, then yes, the mortgage you've got on that house is your liability and somebody else's asset. But what
the value is very different. Yeah.
Yeah, the value. Yeah, the house itself is your asset. Is it anybody else's liability? No, it's not. So it's what's known as a non-financial asset. I have to say that I became aware of this when I started trying to draft the housing policy for the political party I'm standing for at the next Australian election, the New Liberals, because I needed to include people's housing assets as part of their net worth. So they've got a bank account and they've got superannuation, let's say, and they've also got a house. And I thought, well, the superannuation is their asset and it's the liability of the superannuation company. The bank deposit is their asset and the liability of the bank. The house is their asset, but whose liability is it? The answer is nobody's. So what you have to do, and we're just redesigning...
Until you sell it.
Well, no, we'd say it becomes somebody else's asset, but nobody's liability. Okay?
Yeah. But then when they sell it, they'll get a loan, presumably from the bank. So you'll be back to the...
This is where you've got to be careful. The loan itself, if you buy the house with a loan, then you've got a liability of the loan, which is the asset of the bank that lent the money to you. But what you acquire is the house itself. And the house is your asset and nobody else's liability. So
my point. I hear what you're saying, because we're all seeing that, because all our houses are worth, particularly post COVID, are worth more than they were going into COVID. We're seeing big house price increases everywhere. But so we all know that our house is actually worth way more than we are paying off our mortgage on. But when I sell my house, and this will definitely be the case in Australia, won't it? Then somebody else is going to go to the bank and say, okay, I'm buying £1 million or $1 million house. Which would be cheap in Australia these days, wouldn't it? I'm buying $1 million house. I need $1 million loan, or I need a $900,000 loan. So then it sort of plays catch up, doesn't it? It's that period in between where it's not mortgaged by anybody. And
but actually, this is the point that I'm still working on how you work out the overall logic of, because what actually drives that house price, and I know this empirically from checking numerous countries around the world, what causes house prices to rise is accelerating mortgage debt. Okay? Yeah. So, and then I've explained the logic there many occasions. Just to repeat it, when you buy a house, as you're saying, you don't buy it with cash. Most people don't, except for your rich mate in the UK. Lenny
Blavnik.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah. So people like that can buy a house with cash, but most of us have to borrow money to buy the house. So the demand for the house is new mortgage loans. And if you look at the aggregate number of houses being sold, and the demand for all those houses in monetary terms is the sum of all the new mortgage debt taking out. So the change in the level of mortgage debt is the monetary demand for houses. Then that's your demand, so that's your demand side of the equation. And as we all know, supply of housing is very rigid, very not fixed, but it moves very slowly compared to the demand. So the number of houses that are going to be sold is going to be the number. If you divide the sale price, like the $1 million example you used for Australia, which would be a cheap house. And I think the average price in Australia is exceeding $1 million in a house. In places like Sydney, it's $1.3 million. But when you divide the amount of demand coming in by the number of houses being offered for sale, that effectively is the number of houses that can be purchased by the buyers, and that's what gives you a monetary value on those houses. Now that monetary value, in other words, and when you then say, well, what are my assets? You record the value of the house you now own at effectively this price, the last price that a similar house was sold for in your market area. So you are going to record, your house, which you're sitting and you haven't sold. You're going to put that down on your own tally of assets and liabilities, saying, "Oh, that's worth $1 million." So my net worth starts off as $1 million that I have as an asset, which is not a liability of anybody else. So there is a link, in other words, between
and because it's not a liability for anybody else, doesn't that mean that I can accumulate that asset without impacting anyone else? So this idea that maybe Boris is right, maybe the very wealthy who are accumulating that wealth aren't stopping anybody else accumulating wealth.
But the thing is, the reason that you can actually sell it for a higher price is somebody borrows money to buy it.
Yeah.
So you get caught up. There is a link between these two circuits. So in terms of assets which are somebody else's liability, that's where money comes from. Particularly, of course, we're talking the credit system rather than government created money here. But you don't buy a house with money the government gives you most of the time. You buy it with money you get from a bank. So you've taken out you've borrowed £1 million, let's say in the UK's case, which gives you £1 million worth of buying power, offset by precisely £1 million of debt that you owe to the bank. And then when you give that £1 million to the person you're buying the house off, they get £1 million effectively in cash. You get the house, which you're valuing at £1 million. So you think you've come out even, and you're expecting that to increase in value over time. But it'll only increase in value if somebody else is willing to borrow 1.1 million and buy it off you at a later stage. So the valuation of these financial assets is caught up in the financial bubble of the financial assets, which are where when somebody's asset is somebody else's liability. It's messy.
So what are we saying here then? So we're saying on this whole thing about the flows that you were talking about and the difference between accumulating cash versus making a profit. So I think it's very clear, isn't it? If you run a business that's making a profit, then you are employing people to get to that situation. So you're helping the money go around. Basically, you're speeding it up. You're employing people. They're getting money. Everybody wins in that situation, and it's not constrained fully by the money supply, is it? Because if you are borrowing to invest, then you're actually expanding the money supply, and then you're also speeding up the velocity of money. So that's what's helping the economy grow. So if your business wasn't there and you weren't doing that, then the economy would be smaller.
And in fact, what I find, I still haven't checked this out empirically, but it looks like the case, the higher the level of private debt, the slower money turns over.
Right.
Again, this is one of these cases where we apply our personal logic to a situation which is actually caused by a collective phenomenon, and therefore we damage that collective phenomenon.
But is that because that private debt is going into housing rather than going into businesses, though?
Yeah, potentially, yes, because when you borrow for a business, you actually are saying, what can I make out of this money? What turnover can I get out of it? When you borrow for an asset, you're saying, I want to buy this for a million, sit on my ass on it for 5 years and sell it for 2 million. And yeah, exactly.
So surely, if you were able to split the two out and you looked at how much private debt is for investments in business growth, then that's what would be contributing to improving the velocity of money and the supply of money and ultimately the GDP of the country. If you separated out housing, the problem is housing is such a vast proportion, isn't it, of how much money is
that's the trouble.
lent out in this country.
Yeah. Most of the money that's borrowed these days is going into asset purchases, and then it's caught up in this whole link between financial and non-financial assets. And predominantly housing. I mean, housing is by far the most important element for the vast majority of people. So and of course, what we're doing as well, and this is the other crazy thing about it, when you say my house is worth £1 million, what you're saying, depending on the stage of the market you're in, is if I put my house on the market, find somewhere else to live, pay all the transfer costs, and wait long enough until somebody's willing to pay my offering price, the house is worth £1 million. In other words, it's not it's not at call, whereas a bank account is at call, and we tend to confuse the two. And of course, what can happen with if you do then have like a bubble like happened in America with the 2007 financial crisis. You had the subprime boom going on beforehand, and everybody was borrowing money to buy housing. Everybody was driving up house prices in the belief that if they couldn't afford to service it out of their income, they could just sell the house for a profit and they'd join the American dream. Well, of course, the American nightmare is what reacted, because when people, and this started happening in 2006, when enough people found themselves unable to make that sale because the transfer costs overwhelmed them, they were going to make a loss on the house, etc., etc. Suddenly, the demand for houses collapsed, and you went from house prices rising 20% per year to them falling 40% in 1 year, and that's what's dangerous about non-financial assets, because they're not worth what you've written down on paper; they're worth what you can sell them for. and that can when people are still when the borrowing side, when people who are taking out more mortgage debt to go then and buy the houses, and that's going to be propelling that notional value of the house higher. But if they stop doing that, that notional demand can collapse, and then suddenly you go from having a very highly a house you're valuing at 1.3 million quid is currently something you're going to get 700,000 for, and that loss wipes out the remainder of your financial assets.
So Leonard Blavnik, I just love saying his name now. We're going to hear him at least 3 times more before the end of this podcast. Sir Leonard Blavnik, there's the first one. He only 2 more to go. When he saves his money, when he's by saving it, I mean he's investing it in stocks and shares or some form of asset. He is taking that away from somebody else in that. Because it's his asset, it's got to be someone else's liability. So it's got to level out at some time. We can't all be billionaires.
Well, this is again where it gets quite hairy, because if you're trying to accumulate cash, and if you're trying to turn your profit into accumulated cash, then to accumulate that cash, unless the money supply is growing, that accumulation of cash had to come at somebody else's expense.
Yeah.
And so that undermines Boris's. We can all continue rising.
And if he just goes, I'm just going to save it all as cash, and he puts it back in the bank, I mean that cash is destroyed the moment, because it presumably it started off as a loan, but in any case it's going back into the bank. That would be destroying that money, wouldn't it? As far as the money supply is concerned.
If you paid off the debt, okay. If you simply put the money in the bank account and then thought you could continue growing your bank account every year, the only way you can do that is if the banks and the government. But let's focus on the private credit system in this talk. If the banks are creating more debt. So an individual can accumulate in a system with a constant supply of money, but they can only accumulate at the expense of all the other individuals in that system. The only way all the individuals can accumulate more cash over time is if the banking sector is creating more cash over time. And this is one little thing that I decided to do a cartoon book on with Miguel Guerra, that one wonderful cartoonist who does the Seven Robots work, and it's about to start being published by Archaven Comics, and it's called Funny Money. So what I set up in this is 3 American redneck capitalists, Tom, Dick, and Harry, and Tom, Dick, and Harry are Milton Friedmanites. They're believers in the private sector only, get rid of the government, etc., etc. So they decide to create a state in part of the Midwest of America where they happen to own everything, and they have a fixed amount of money, and they decide to check and see, try work out in practice, actually see how their economic theories work out in practice, and it doesn't quite work out the way they think it does.
Because of what we've been describing today, fundamentally, isn't it?
Yeah, because if one of them accumulates, they accumulate at the expense of the other. So they're all trying to accumulate money, and suddenly they're finding if one goes up, the other 2 go down by precisely the same amount of money, which initially they think is a conspiracy and robbery, and then finally one of them works out, hang on a sec, if you're going to accumulate more cash and there's only X amount of cash in the economy, then I'm going to have X minus the extra bit that you accumulate, so your accumulation.
Right. But here's another scenario though, because accumulation obviously is the opposite of debt. I've got money that other people can't have, or assets that other people can't have. But if in that scenario I described, where Sir Leonard Blavnik, whose name you'll only hear one more time in this podcast,
I'm going to come hold you to that.
If he has made that 23 billion and he decides he's going to put it all in the bank, and it's not a loan that he's paying back, then the bank goes, okay, we've got 23 billion now, which basically adds to their reserves, as I understand it. So they could actually then safely lend out more money. Well,
hello, they can't lend reserves.
No, but they have that, but it's not lending that money out. It's giving them the liquidity they need so that they can issue more loans. So that 23 billion allows them to create more money, new money in the economy, and they go, that's right, we've got this liquidity. Thanks to Sir Leonard Blavnik last time. His money's gone into the bank, and that gives us the flexibility, the liquidity for us to create more money for the rest of the world, to borrow money, to invest, which is going to help the economy grow.
I think you've made a Blavnik logical error there. and that is that if Bladnick, and I'm going to say it a few times to annoy the hell out of you as well.
You said it wrong, but I can't correct
That's
you.
right.
I've used up all mine.
Okay, so if Bladnick
change the V and T round, and then you're there.
V and T. So it's not
change the V and the T. BLAVTNIK.
Vlavnik. Okay.
Yeah, that'll do.
So if Bladnick whacks into the bank account and doesn't spend it, the circulation of money declines, the economy slows down, and the banks look at it and think, oh, we better not lend any more money now. The rate of the level of economic activity has dropped, so we're going to create less money and maybe even cancel some loans, and you fall into a recession. So this is the paradox that Keynes once called the widow's cruse. That if you try to accumulate money, you slow down how fast money turns over, and the GDP declines because you're trying to accumulate. Because what you've got a flow of money that you're trying to hang on to part of it, and by hanging on to it, you don't change one zot the amount of money in existence. What you change is how fast the money is turning over. So my three little American capitalists all attempt to save more money. What they're doing is spending more slowly, and the GDP collapses. And they then realise the only way they're going to get the economy to grow is if they spend more. And so they find themselves, that rather than having this desire to be frugal, they find that being frugal is actually counterproductive. And this is, again, part of what Keynes argued in terms of the widow's cruse. It's also what was put forward by, in the fable of the bees, by one of the pre-physiocrats, way back even before Adam Smith. Mirabeau, I think it is, the parable of the bees. And basically saying that what a private virtue is a public vice. So if you practice thrift, the impact of you practicing thrift is to reduce everybody else's income.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because one of Friedman's big things. I mean, he argued against himself quite a lot, didn't he, Milton Friedman? And one of the
he was logical enough to do that. Yeah.
one of the. I mean, because on the one side, he was, all about borrowing to invest to grow, which is what we've been talking about. But on the other side, he had his permanent income hypothesis, which is basically saying, if I've got money left over after tax, I'm not necessarily going to spend it all. I'm going to squirrel stuff away because I'm worried about the future, which we all do. We go, okay, I'm not going to earn as much as I am now in 10 years' time, so I'd better save. But of course, Milton Friedman on the other side was all about, well, saving is not necessarily good, is it? You really should be spending because that's what's helping the economy to grow.
Yeah, and all these paradoxes turn up when you start working at the aggregate level, but your thinking works at the individual level. And this is why neoclassical economics is a waste of space, because they try to use the guidance of an individual for the collective. And again, for an individual, if you want to accumulate money, then you should spend more slowly. And if you spend more slowly, the overall system declines, and your income might fall as well. So your attempt to save actually ends up you dis-saving, which is also one of the little scenarios I set up in the first volume of Funny Money. This failure to distinguish between stocks and flows, and the difference between financial and non-financial assets, and then the value of non-financial assets actually reflecting how much debt is growing, private debt, particularly mortgage debt, which is a financial asset. It's a tangled web, and it's no wonder we fall over both intellectually and fiscally.
Well, it's that definition of saving, isn't it? When people think of savings, they think of, I'm putting money into a bank account, and it's not actually serving any useful purpose. It's not being reinvested and employing people. That's so because it's curious, isn't it? Because on the one side, you think, well, saving should net zero at the aggregate level. So if you've got two people, any one person spends, it's going to be a saving for the next person because the next person gets it. And if they don't do anything with it, then it's a saving. So aggregate savings would be zero. But if you look at the figures from the Office of National Statistics, they publish data showing the ratio of savings to income. And it's always above zero. In fact, it's 20% through the early part of the pandemic.
And this comes down to how they define it. And this is when macroeconomics and monetary definitions clash with each other. It's like in monetary sense, if you save, you're spending less. Okay, which means at the aggregate level, expenditure is identical to income. Okay? What you spend is income for somebody else. So that's one of the fundamental identities of macroeconomics. But the way income and consumption are defined in the national accounts is that income is the total turnover in the economy in one particular year, and savings is the level of consumption subtracted from that income. Now that's supposed to be equal to investment. So what they're saying is not that people are saving 20% per year, meaning that bank accounts are growing at 20% per year, but of the turnover of the economy, 80% goes into consumption and 20% goes into investment. And that investment is then treated as savings in the way the national accounts are defined. But it's not at all what we mean by savings in terms of bank accounts.
So we could all be there making a profit, a healthy profit. The issue is what do you do with that money? If everyone made a healthy profit in their businesses and they spent it all, then the economy would be going along well. We'd all feel quite happy. It's when we actually when we don't spend it all and we accumulate and we invest in assets, that's where we hit issues, because I can't grow the size of my asset base. If there was only two people in the country, there was me with a net worth of £50,000, and there was the richest man in Britain today. Do you know who that is, by the way?
No, I can't pronounce his name. I'm sorry, I've forgotten how to pronounce it.
And I can't say it. So him worth 23 billion, and I'm worth 50,000. If I accumulated, and I was running a profitable business, and he was just sitting on his yacht, obviously I'd only be selling stuff to him. But I couldn't accumulate my profit anymore without impacting his.
Yeah.
So that, but I can still be, if I wasn't hung up on that, just trying to support Boris here, because he needs help right now with his levelling up argument. If I wasn't worried about accumulating assets, I was just worried about my lifestyle. And I was going to spend without accumulating, which is a good thing anyway. Why the hell should we accumulate? It's bad for the economy. It's bad for kids when they inherit. Accumulation is a bad thing, I think. Then everyone can have a better lifestyle by creating businesses or being employed in businesses that increase profits without hitting that accumulation issue, can't they?
And this is where the best example of this was the Wargel experiment in Austria during the run-up to the Second World War, because of the Depression, the private credit system had collapsed and 25% of the population was out of a job. And the mayor, who was a fan of the work of Gazelle, the monetary theorist, I think it's Gustav Gazelle. Actually, I'm not sure at the moment. I better check.
Yeah, very thin legs, didn't you? I remember
that. Yep, that's true. He introduced a script which, if you didn't spend it, you had to put a stamp on it, and the stamp reduced its value over time. The script could be used to pay local government taxes and was also used for local commerce, and that turned over so much faster than the credit-based money, which the system had virtually broken down, that everybody was, the economy of Wargel went gangbusters, and there was full employment until the Austrian central bank stepped in and blocked the whole experiment, which was one of the factors that led to everybody voting for Hitler in the Austrian elections not long after. So if you increase the velocity of turnover of whatever you're using for money, you'll increase prosperity. If everybody tries to save, and this is the parable of the bees argument, if you all try to save and spirit it away, the economy will decline. So with a fixed supply of money, a personal attempt to save, cannot save because you can't change in the aggregate the amount of money through not spending it.
How do bees get into that? What's the parable of the bees?
Frankly, it's so long since I've read it, I've forgotten. I just know it's called the parable of the bees. I better get back and read it again.
Right. There's your homework for you then.
Great, just what I need, more work.
No, for our listeners. No, you don't need to.
Okay,
for our listeners.
Let's have a go, and let's have a little. Let's actually have a few podcasts where we talk about some classics like that. Because I read that. I read that so many years ago. It's probably about 40 years ago that I read it.
Well, listen, the listeners can do that if you can submit your homework by Friday, and Steve will give you marks out of 10. How about that?
Oh, thanks a lot.
Then you got to start marking homework. Add that to your workload. Yeah. Okay, sorry I interrupted there, but I think we've made the point, haven't we? That the difference is between, and it is all to do with flows. I mean, profit is a flow, and accumulation is
a stock.
Is a stock which is not dead money, but it's slow money, and it's in the finance sector.
Yeah, and the attempt to save the money actually slows down how fast it turns over. So what you end up with is a smaller by trying to save, which you're being responsible and frugal, you've actually reduced the rate of the size of the economy. So you try to make your nest egg bigger, and what you've ended up making is making the tree smaller, so to speak. So it is one of those classic cases where you have to distinguish turnover of money from accumulation, and then non-financial assets, which you can have a net positive position in, from financial assets where everybody's, because one financial asset is somebody else's financial liability, they all cancel out in the end. And then it's the financial assets that actually drive the value of the non-financial assets.
Great stuff. Look, I think everyone will have followed us unusually this week. I think we carried everyone through that.
I think you're being optimistic, but that might be because you're a good friend of what's his name?
Old Blavy. As I like to call him.
Right.
So Lenny Blavy, all right, okay, we'll catch you again next week. I want to talk about information asymmetry next week.
Oh dear, bloody Joe, eh? Okay. at least I can pronounce Stiglitz. That's good.
Yeah, good. Excellent. Okay, we'll catch you then. Okay, thanks, Steve.
Bye.
And that is it for today, for this week. I'm Phil Dobbie with Steve again next week. Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, then please share it with your friends, like it on YouTube, and subscribe to this channel.